Hello, everyone. Today's story will drag you deep into the forest, where silence itself becomes the loudest scream. Imagine sitting by your campfire, and suddenly the woods go quiet. No crickets, no wind, nothing but the sound of your own breath. And something else, waiting, just beyond the firelight. The forest at night carries a strange duality, both alive and eerily still, as if two worlds overlap in the same place. During the day, the woods hum with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, and branches swaying with the weight of hidden life. But when the sun sinks and darkness creeps over the treetops, something changes in the air. The noise that once filled the space begins to fade, leaving behind pockets of silence that feel almost heavy, almost unnatural. Campers often describe this silence as the most unnerving part of the wilderness, far worse than the growls of unseen animals. It is in those moments when even the crack of a twig can set the heart racing, echoing louder than it should. Silence in the woods has a way of amplifying fear, feeding the imagination until every shadow hides intent. It presses against the ears, forcing awareness of every small detail. And in that awareness, dread quietly settles in like an old friend. The stillness does not come all at once, but in unsettling fragments, as though the forest itself is retreating step by step. A bird's call may falter mid-note, leaving an unfinished echo that seems to vanish before hitting the ground. The usual hum of insects weakens until even the faintest buzz becomes a memory, fading into the growing void. Leaves that once rustled with unseen life hang motionless, suspended in an unnatural calm. It is then, when the forest grows silent, that the camper becomes aware of their own body in a way that feels uncomfortable. The heartbeat grows louder, the rhythm of breath too noticeable, the shuffle of clothing unbearably sharp in the quiet. It is as though the woods turn every sense inward, magnifying what should remain small. And when this happens, the silence feels less like peace and more like a warning. There are stories told by those who camp deep in the wilderness, accounts that share a pattern too consistent to ignore. Many describe sitting by a fire when the hush descends, the flames snapping and popping in defiance of the encroaching quiet. At first, it seems harmless, even calming, until the mind begins to notice what is missing. No owl, no cricket, no distant splash of water or shift of branches, just fire, breath, and the dreadful awareness of being surrounded by something unseen. Then comes the second realization, the one that truly disturbs. Silence is never natural in a place that thrives with life. Something has caused it. Something has silenced the forest in its entirety. That knowledge spreads unease through the body like ice in the veins. A seasoned camper once described the sensation as being watched, not with eyes of flesh and blood, but with the presence of something greater. The silence seemed to press against the skin, curling around the edges of the firelight as though it were a living thing. They said it began with the subtle crunch of leaves just beyond vision, faint but distinct, impossible to mistake. It did not repeat quickly, but slow, deliberate, as though each step was taken with intention. When they looked, the forest appeared empty, a tangle of trees and shadow stretching endlessly. Yet the sound returned, growing closer, and then ceased entirely when the fire was stirred. The camper never slept that night, watching as the woods remained still, waiting for something to reveal itself. Nothing did, but the silence never lifted. There is a psychology to fear that silence exploits with cruel precision, and the wilderness knows this better than most. The absence of sound removes familiar markers of safety, the small noises that tell us life goes on. Without them, the brain fills the void with possibility, crafting dangers where none may exist. But in the forest, where predators do move silently, those possibilities are not so easily dismissed. A single misplaced noise, like a stick breaking under weight, carries more weight than hours of harmless chatter. Campers report gripping their flashlights tighter, straining their ears for patterns, unsure if they should shout into the dark or remain absolutely quiet. Each second stretches into eternity, time distorted by the heaviness of waiting. And when silence lingers too long, fear begins to erode reason, leaving only primal instinct. It is not uncommon for campers to speak of hallucinations in such moments, though whether they are tricks of the mind or something else entirely remains unclear. Eyes adjust to the dark, only to betray the watcher with illusions. Figures shifting between trees, shapes forming where none should be. Sometimes, however, those figures refuse to vanish when looked at directly. They remain just beyond the glow of the fire, unmoving, patient, as though sculpted from the night itself. One camper recalled seeing a figure with no detail, no edges, only a void darker than the rest of the forest. It never advanced, never retreated, only stayed in place until morning light revealed nothing at all. Yet the silence of that night was remembered more vividly than any nightmare. The silence can take another form too, not in the forest, but within the tent, where fabric is the only barrier against the unknown. To lie in a sleeping bag with the world outside muted is to be buried alive in stillness. Every shuffle of cloth becomes deafening. Every breath betrays the sleeper's location. Campers speak of nights when even the insects refuse to stir, leaving only the hollow sound of one's own body shifting on the ground. In that state, imagination thrives, and the mind listens for what it hopes never to hear. The rustle of grass, the brush of fabric, the faint exhale of something unseen. Silence within a tent is not safety. It is vulnerability disguised as shelter. Some believe the silence is a natural cycle of the forest, a lull when creatures rest, and the night pauses briefly before resuming. But those who have experienced it insist otherwise, pointing to how it feels calculated, imposed, unnatural. Nature rarely halts entirely without reason. Predators move through the trees, and the smaller life forms vanish into hiding. It is not the calm of peace, but the anticipation of danger. The question then becomes not whether something is out there, but what has claimed dominion over the forest at that moment. And, perhaps worse, why it remains unseen. When dawn finally comes after a night of silence, relief often arrives too late. The unease does not vanish with the light. It lingers, etched into memory like a scar. Campers pack their belongings in haste, unable to shake the sense of being unwelcome. The woods may look harmless under the rising sun, but the knowledge of what the silence concealed lingers in the mind. Some never return to those places, unable to face the possibility of experiencing it again. Others are drawn back, chasing explanations for what the wilderness hides. But explanations never come, and the silence always waits, patient as the trees themselves. In the end, the silence of the woods becomes a story told around campfires, a warning passed from voice to voice. It is a reminder that fear is not always loud, not always filled with screams or violence. Sometimes it is quiet, oppressive, and absolute. The forest does not need to move to remind us of our fragility. It only needs to stop. The silence is the oldest language of the wild, a voice that speaks without sound, telling all who listen that something is out there. And though nothing may ever reveal itself, the message remains: you are not alone. Chacho